Well, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau isn't just a case of nepotism gone wild, though. Of course he is. Before using his father's name to take power, Trudeau was a drama teacher and apparently still can't resist the urge to lecture people. During a recent town hall, Trudeau interrupted a woman and corrected her for using the sinister sexist word, mankind.
Maternal love is the love that's going to change the future of mankind. So we'd like you to...
we like to say people kind, not necessarily mankind. It's more inclusive.
There we go, exactly. Yes, thank you.
We can all learn from each other.
We can all learn from each other. Of course, Trudeau can't win in this postmodern PC world that he helped create. Feminists have already denounced him for mansplaining. Of course, the revolution always eats itself. That's the good part. That's about it for us tonight. Tune in every night at 8 to the show that's the sworn enemy of lying, pomposity.
Awarded more than 10 million Canadian dollars to Omar Khadr to make up for the terrible suffering he endured while imprisoned at Guantanamo Bay. After giving this man the money, the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau admitted he didn't even bother calling the widow of Christopher Speer. He's the Delta Force medic who was murdered by Khadr in 2002 in a grenade blast. Khadr himself, meanwhile, says he wishes everybody would just move on and forget what he did.
So this is a time for, reconciliation and hopefully not forgetting, but, moving on and healing. I was angry or upset about what happened, but it's been hard, finding jobs or going to school and stuff with my past reputation. So this is going to help me move forward.
Yeah, $10.5 million from Canadian taxpayers. That'll help you move forward. One man who can't move on quite so easily or seamlessly is Sergeant Lane Morris. He was blinded in one eye during the same firefight that killed Christopher Speer. Sergeant Morris joins us tonight. Sergeant, thanks a lot for coming on tonight. What do you make of this?
Thanks.
What's your response to this?
Oh, I think I've said this before. What kind of sick and twisted ivory tower do you have to live in as the Prime Minister of Canada to decide to award this man 10.5 million good, hard-working Canadian folks' dollars to equals justice? It makes no sense.
It doesn't, and I think it's more a statement about the decadence of the West than it is about the man who perpetrated this crime. This is almost a rhetorical question, but did the Prime Minister contact you before the settlement?
No, he did not. First I heard about it was when my phone started ringing from Canada. Former Prime Minister Stephen Harper contacted me to apologize on behalf of Canadians in general and the military folks up there, and I thought that was nice of him.
I don't think there's any evidence that most Canadians agree with this or are for it at all. Is that your sense?
It is, and that makes perfect sense. I don't think you've got to be Canadian or American to say, okay, there's a guy out there who killed the U.S. soldier, and now you're going to give him $10.5 million because he was lonely at Guantanamo, or he didn't have a shoulder to cry on. It's just how that balances out as justice is just beyond me and obviously Canadians. I think I've seen polls that 71% of Canadians are outraged by this action.
It's the definition of decadence. Tell us, if you would, and if it's too painful, don't, but about the day that all of this happened.
No, I don't. I have no problem talking about it, Tucker. We were after Omar Khadr's father, who was bin Laden's finance guy. The compound, the isolated compound we went to, his father was gone. Omar was there with 4 or 5 other guys. We surrounded that compound, myself and 4 other soldiers. We waited for 45 minutes. They wouldn't come out and talk to us. When we finally got the rest of my team there, as well as some Afghans that we were working with, when our interpreters went in to try and make contact, the guys inside that compound just popped up over a low rise inside the compound and executed them point blank, threw hand grenades at the rest of us. We shot 2 or 3 of them right there at the gate, and as the others ran to the back of the compound throwing hand grenades as they went, I popped up to shoot a couple of guys with my rifle. It's got a 203, the grenade launcher on the bottom, and as I pulled the trigger on that grenade launcher, I felt something smack me in the right eye. Turns out a hand grenade they'd thrown I hadn't seen went off, and a piece of shrapnel hit me in the right eye.
And that ended your service career?
It did. You know, I'm a shooter, and the military the Army would have let me stay in as a trainer or something like that. But having to shoot left-handed, I'd be a liability to an A team, and so I'd put in 21 years, and so I took my retirement and got out.
How bitter this must be for you, really. In addition to all of that, to watch the man who did it become rich and apparently unrepentant. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry for you.
Well, you know, it is. It's bitter to see a man who and the Canadian government in particular, not just remain neutral in the matter. I mean, they went out of their way. Mr. Trudeau had to go out of his way to get Omar this money, to cut short any kind of negotiation, and just say, let's give him 10.5, make sure we get that done before the Americans have any chance of going after that money. To protect this man, that's really reopening a wound. I feel bad for Chris Spear's wife. She's a great lady, and it's got to be tough for her to see the Canadian government really open that wound. And I feel bad for Canadian military. I served over there with those guys, and they've got to be feeling pretty bad about their government rewarding a man who did his very best to kill them.
I mean, I'm sure Trudeau did this as an expression of hostility toward America, but he undermines his own society by doing it, and that's depressing. Sergeant Morris, thanks a lot for that.
And that's right. Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me.
Let's talk a little bit about Canada with Canada's own Jordan B. Peterson. He's the author of this book. It is called 12 Rules for Life, An Antidote to Chaos. When the book came out, it's now #1 on Amazon. He was on our couch, but we wanted Dr. Peterson to join us today. First off, Dr. Peterson, you put together this book after hearing from the people that talked to you after attending your lectures, right?
Yes, well, and before that as well. I've been writing it for about 5 years.
So the whole idea of 12 rules for life is what?
Well, people need guidelines in their life, and what I've done is to try to write a sequence of rules that are witty and sometimes obvious as well, I suppose, but to try to go deep down inside of them and to find out why it is that we need principles to live by, and also to point out that we do in fact need principles to live by to guide us towards a meaningful and productive life, and one that helps us deal with the tragedy and malevolence of existence.
Well, we'll all have to go pick that book up. Congratulations on it, making it to #1. You've been on our show quite a few times, and you are just so smart. So I think your advice is something that other people need to pick up and read through the pages. Thank you so much for also weighing in on some other topics affecting your area, Canada. You're in Toronto right now, and Justin Trudeau, he interrupts a woman at a town hall. She's asking him a question, and he didn't like one of the words that she used. Listen to this soundbite, and then we'll get your reaction.
All right.
So that's why we came here today to ask you to also look into the policies that religious charitable organizations have in our legislation so that it can also be changed, because maternal love is the love that's going to change the future of mankind. So we'd like you to look into
we like to say people kind, not necessarily mankind, because it's more inclusive.
There we go, exactly.
And the crowd roars.
Yeah. Well, it's quite the performance. I mean, I'm afraid that our Prime Minister is only capable of running his ideas on a few very narrow ideological tracks. We saw the first evidence of that when he put his cabinet together. He insisted upon making it 50% women, despite the fact that only about 22% of the elected MPs were women. And it was easier for him to do that than it was for him to screen people for the sort of competence that would actually be necessary to be cabinet members. So we've seen a fair bit of this behavior, but that was the most egregious example, I suppose.
Dr. Peterson, I recall you taking some heat because you said you would refuse to use these gender-neutral pronouns. Why was that?
Well, I actually said that I would refuse to use the pronouns that were mandated by law because they were mandated by law. I feel that it's completely inappropriate of the government to decide what language the citizenry should speak. There's never been an example of that in British common law history, and I believe that That was a very, very bad precedent. I didn't want to use language that I thought was generated by radical leftist propagandists, and so I said I wouldn't do it.
I saw one tweet this morning that said Neil Armstrong should have said one small step for peoplekind.
Yeah, well, you know, Trudeau was listening to an earnest woman try to discuss something important, and he interjected a ideological statement in the middle of the dialogue, and that indicates, I think, precisely the way he thinks. And I don't think he does think. I think he runs an ideology in his head and accepts the output without question. And I think we're really going to pay for it in Canada in ways that we can't yet imagine.
Well, we're going to find out, because you believe it's coming to us here in America, and you've been to both countries frequently. Now let's talk about something else that builds on your premise. This whole father-daughter dance that are being canceled around the country because of gender guidelines. Even Donald Trump Jr. weighed in with this quote: "The father-daughter dances inherently leave people out, not just because of transgender status, just life in general. These can be really uncomfortable, triggering events." That according to Jared Fox, New York City Department of Education. So that's their response to cancel the dance, because there's a lot of people that can't go. Is there a problem with that?
Well, the problem with that is self-evident, but it's part of this absolute onslaught by the radical leftists on the fundamental normative structures of our culture. And if you're going to cancel everything that's triggering to everyone, then you're going to cancel everything altogether, because there isn't a single thing that anyone can ever say or do that isn't going to offend someone. And the idea that this is being done so that certain people's feelings won't be hurt, I think, is absolutely absurd. It's not compassion and care that's driving this. It's the desire to put forward a very pernicious ideology, and it's being very, very successful in its application.
But, Dr. Peterson, they say that they're doing that to make things more inclusive.
Yeah, well, they say all sorts of things, and they are a very small, noisy, dangerous minority. And it's really appalling that we're bending over backwards to do their bidding without question, under the name of compassion.
A lot of my friends have been posting pictures of the daddy-daughter dance recently, and I think the pictures are so cute. Are little girls going to miss out on a memory?
Well, yes, for sure. And the thing is that even your terminology, when you're talking about little girls, is something that's going to be increasingly forbidden as we demolish the classic gender ideas. And no one's going to benefit from that. And people it's going to be a real catastrophe.
I mean, people are even talking about deciding on what gender they're going to be as youngsters.
Yeah, well, that's happening all over. It's an absolute epidemic. And we've decided that children as young as 3 or 4 can now decide what gender they are and then undergo the appropriate surgical and biological alterations to bring their morphology in keeping with that. And it's a mistake of epic proportions, and we're going to pay for it in a big way.
We do hear of that, but how often does that happen?
It happens increasingly. Like in Britain in 2015, there were, I think, 57 kids in the gender dysphoria clinics, and last year there were 2,000.
All right. He's got a great book out there, great number-wise right now. #1 in Amazon. It's called 12 Rules for Life. Dr. Jordan Peterson, thank you very much for joining us today from Canada.
Thank you.
Thanks very much for the invitation.
Yeah, and thanks for wearing the gel. Looks good.